Today was a weird day, weirder than usual. I had a long conversation with one of the guys in the 3rd housing unit, or house, as they're known on RIkers. He had a small cut on the underside of his wrist given to him by another inmate, which isn't that weird. But that inmate, let's call him the friendly guy, is someone I've grown to like over the past couple months. So it was a bit of a weird day. Rikers Island is a strange place, and because everything about it is so dramatic and extreme and insane all at once, anyone who's there for any length of time begins to think of those things as normal and ordinary, because they are. I'm only there a couple days a week to teach workshops in music and songwriting. I can only imagine how disjointed and difficult it must be to be there for any length of time. I thought it was going to be late this morning, but I wound up pretty much on time. Getting to Rikers is not so easy from my place in Brooklyn. It takes 2 subway lines, a Lyft or Uber ride if I'm pressed for time, or a long walk to the train, from the train to the Q100 bus, which is the only way to cross the 1-mile bridge to the island without a private vehicle and pass. Once there, I catch a DOC bus to get to the actual jail where I'm working. The difficulty simply accessing the island is a major issue for families and communities with members who are locked up, and is supposed to be addressed by the plan to close the jail. The idea is, if people are housed in their home borough, it'll make it easier for loved ones to visit regularly, and that family and community bonds will not be further frayed by the arduous journey it now takes to visit inmates at Rikers. Rikers functions on the overarching idea that time doesn't matter. Everyone from the staff to the officers to the inmates is waiting to leave, even if they have nowhere to go. To teach my workshops, I have to arrive and leave at specific times, but other than that, my time is just as nebulous as anyone else's. I might wait for up to an hour or more to get into the jail if something I brought in was questioned by security. Several times I've been turned away due to lockdowns or lack of the right clearance form for my gear, which I always take pains to clear with the administration. But at Rikers, communication itself isn't always clear. Once inside, I could be detained for hours if the jail was suddenly locked down due to an incident, which I probably wouldn't learn about till days later, if at all. I've also been turned away from coming into a housing unit to teach if there was some kind of incident that happened just prior to my arrival, or that was occurring when I showed up. A longtime colleague put it succinctly when I first started volunteering several years ago, advising me that the American carceral system is, quote, good at keeping people inside. That's about it, unquote. That's where the efficiency begins and ends. As always, I went through the x-ray machine with all my gear, but the officer didn't even ask for my ID. I definitely showed it to him, though, just to be sure. And I definitely showed it to the guy in the booth when I checked my phone. You can't really be too careful in terms of protocol. Rikers is a place that loves rules, enforced or not. There was a new guy in the 1st house today, a young kid. At least he seemed young to me. He told me he was an artist, as in a recording artist. In the several years I've taught at Rikers, I've encountered more than a few inmates who've spent time in the studio and performed professionally. And I love the confidence they exhibit by referring to themselves as artists, something I've struggled with as a composer and performer. Most I've met are rappers and don't necessarily sing or play instruments, though a number of them do have musical backgrounds, and often deep ones. Anyway, he was pretty into it. He didn't know much about guitars, asked me immediately if I could hook him up with anybody on the outside who could help him with studio work. I told him I couldn't, unfortunately. In terms of the outside, I never offer anything. We're instructed not to, strictly. At times, I really appreciate the option of wearing a mask, because I'm not really that crazy about having people know exactly what I look like or what my last name is. It's not that I'm afraid, though Rikers can be a dangerous place. It's just that I want there to be pretty strict boundaries. I want the inmates to know right away that though I'm friendly and want to try to help them, especially to realize any kind of creative work they want to do, I'm totally uninterested and unwilling to help them break the rules at all. I think of Rikers like I think of the ocean in some ways. While it's not beautiful, it shares the same kind of incredible power. Power that can easily kill you if you don't absolutely defer to it and the unwavering system of rules and culture encompassed by it. As a coping mechanism, I keep myself pretty ignorant of what happens at Rikers in the press, which borders at times on magical thinking with so much unbelievably bad news coming almost daily. Every day there are tragedies of the saddest and most unjust kind, most that don't get covered anywhere. It's very difficult not to think about everyone who's died there and so many I've encountered there who were stuck in a never-ending loop of coming and going, due to being born into terrible circumstances beyond their control. Extreme poverty, addiction, mental illness, lack of education or opportunity. The darkness is overwhelming, and if I'm going to be effective at all in my role, I can't have those things on my mind when I go there. The little I'm trying to do to improve things there seems laughably naive in the face of the reality that it's daily life there. I just want to offer the inmates the chance to express themselves in the very limited way I'm allowed with the tools that are approved for me to use. This morning, as usual, I started by putting the guitars in open G tuning so that when they just hit the instrument, it'll sound like something musical, a G major chord. Playing in open G tuning as a teenager was the first time I felt like I could really play something that moved me. I grew up a big Stones fan, and open G tuning is used in many classic songs such as Honky Tonk Women and Start Me Up. As rudimentary a player as I was then, it gave me the ability to play songs I loved that were important to me, and it was really not that difficult. The new guy did actually play around with the guitars today. Unsolicited, he told me a little of his story. He said he wasn't from New York. He was from Philly and came here on tour. He had a gun on him, got into an argument with somebody, and was now in for murder. I never ask people what they're in for. I don't want to know. Anyway, after the kid was finished, a few other guys came by and we went over some rudimentary stuff. I spent a lot of time the previous night gathering materials people had requested. I offered to bring in songs people liked to try to play them, get them to sing, possibly parlay that into writing something of their own. Sometimes it's even successful. After an hour or so, a slight young man came up to me. He was looking at some of the pages I'd spread out on the table and recognized two songs he'd requested the week before. Holes and Let Her Go by Passenger. I'd forgotten who requested them, so I was glad he came forward. He was surprised I'd brought the songs and was excited, albeit in a subdued way. At Rikers, any kind of obvious joy seems to turn the person expressing it into a target of ridicule. But I have to hand it to this guy. He sang through both songs so softly, I could almost not hear him over my fairly muted accompaniment. But he was excited and he did make an effort. I tried to change things up today by bringing in a cajon, a Peruvian box-shaped hand drum often favored by acoustic performers. People were initially curious. They all thought it was a speaker. Unfortunately, it's a bit noisy and the dining activity rooms where I'm forced to work. There are already 3 TVs in the room. 2 are silent, but one, it seems, is always blasting. Being in the same room with a loud television, a dozen or so people conversing, the telephones are the only connection the guys have to the outside world, didn't really make a drum a welcome addition. One of the guys on the phone expressed his displeasure rather loudly, so the cajon became more of a curiosity when it wasn't functioning as merely a seat. At the end of the first session, a bunch of guys were milling around out front. I think they were being taken to the library or the barber shop, 2 popular destinations. The barbershop especially. They were in the foyer area adjacent to the guard office, known as the bubble. The foyer is outside the barred gate, but still behind the door leading out to the main hallway. As my first session was over, the guards opened the barred gate for me and I struggled through with my 3 guitars, cajon, and my backpack, and set them down and waited till I could get into the bubble to sign the registration book. "Do you want me to sign your book?" I asked the guard. "You can sign it," she replied. "Just wait until we're finished." Sometimes they demand I sign the registration book, the log where every person that comes in and out of the housing unit is recorded. Sometimes they almost refuse. It never seems to be the same reaction. But I wind up signing it even if I have to plead my case to the officer in charge. I sign the book whenever I do a program. It proves I was there when I said I was in case there's ever any question. It's the same when I worked in geriatric healthcare. In jail, if it's not on paper, it didn't happen. By always signing, I have proof. As I was leaving, the Philly guy called me by name and very sweetly thanked me for bringing the music. Most people are typically pretty polite to me, but I'm always on my guard. I've never had somebody be quite this polite, at least not without knowing them for a while, so that was a nice surprise. In the second house, there wasn't really much going on. I set down my things once I was admitted, and only one guy was in the activity room. I'd seen him before, but we'd never really spoken, and he'd never participated in my program. He was watching a DVD of the Boondocks and listening on headphones. I sat and waited. I knew sooner or later somebody would come along and I'd be able to show him a few things. There are a couple guys in the house who are fairly curious and will ask questions. I brought in some information for one who wants to learn music theory. Reading charts, understanding chord progression, that kind of thing. And recommendations for a few books about the music business for another who wants to start a record label. I gave the music theory guy a bunch of pages from a book I thought would be helpful. He thanked me and said he was going to study them. He then told me he was heading upstate for 5 years and was hoping to buy a guitar so he'd have something to do up there. I nodded in support, trying not to wonder what he might have done or what might have been done to him to warrant 5 years upstate. But he didn't offer, and I didn't ask. The other guy who's interested in the music business showed up after a while. Then a bunch of them took off to go to the barber shop. I was a bit dismayed, but this happens pretty much every time one way or another. In these 2-hour sessions, invariably there'll be some downtime where it seems like no one's going to be interested at all in what I have to offer. Then 2 minutes later, people show up, ask questions, suddenly we're making a bunch of noise. The others are telling us to shut up so they can hear the phone or the TV. Today I told the business-minded young man that the video game business is bigger than the music business and the film business combined. And that if he's interested in making money in entertainment, he might want to take a look there. So I told him I didn't know too much about it. He immediately started thinking out loud about why and concluded it's because, as he put it, just like an iPhone, they have new versions of games every year. I nodded in agreement. I asked him if he was able to get the book I recommended from the library, Making It in the New Music Business by RIkers. He said he hadn't yet, and the person from the library didn't make it this week, which was frustrating. We talked about the fact that all outside programming, including me, is being cut at the end of next week, another source of frustration. What do you think is going to happen when it gets hot inside here and there's nothing for us to do? One of the inmates asked me. Again, I nodded in agreement, both of us knowing the answer. When I first started volunteering at RIkers, I was really scared. The scariest guys that I knew were all scared of this place. The only thing I knew about it was a little bit that I remembered from the Basketball Diaries by Jim Carroll. The book is a somewhat fictionalized account of Carroll's life ages 12-15 as a promising basketball prospect and budding heroin addict. Regardless of the ultimate truth of the narrative, he doesn't pull any punches about his subject. Except his time at RIkers. He doesn't write about it at all, except to say he spent a few months there. So that put it in perspective for me. Too much fucking perspective, as Spinal Tap said upon viewing Elvis Presley's grave at Graceland. Apparently yesterday there was an altercation between inmates in the third house, and the friendly guy I mentioned in the beginning was involved. The guy telling the story tried to intervene and got his wrist slashed with a razor blade for his trouble. This fight had resulted in new charges for the friendly guy, and now he's going to have to do a year upstate in addition to his sentence at RIkers. The guy said it wasn't much of a cut, but he was going to sue the city anyway and was expecting a $70,000 payout. He also mentioned he was already suing the city for being held without bail as a flight risk, because although he was an American citizen, he'd spent most of his life living abroad. Couldn't help remarking how crazy it was that the city spent millions annually to both incarcerate and pay people off who'd been hurt while incarcerated. I silently agreed. He was planning on walking out of jail with a couple $100,000, considering buying property in a small town in Italy. He said he was actually happy about how things turned out, because it was going to set him up to live the kind of life he wanted. I was happy for him and almost jealous. I've been pretty broke the last 2 years. We ended up having a great conversation about European cities, film, and history. I like this guy. If we'd met under different circumstances, we might even be able to be friends. He's walking out with enough money to start a new life. I'm contemplating my next gig, knowing this one's about to end, budgeting for the next few months. While it might be nice to be able to Uber all the way home, I'm pumping my gear on the MTA to save cash. It's nice to be able to leave Rikers at the end of the day, no matter how I'm traveling. Though I'm feeling broke and uncertain about the future, I'm free. I wish him luck. I wish them all luck.